Did you know that 1,000 years ago, China was the first nation in the world to invent paper money? Yet paradoxically, it was China that voluntarily abandoned this great monetary experiment and reverted to a silver standard. From this critical decision, the tragic history of monetary warfare unfolded for centuries to come. Back in the Ming Dynasty, ancient China's economy reached its zenith. Commerce flourished, trade expanded, and transactions were constant. But the primary currency, cumbersome copper coins, was choking economic growth. A single large transaction often required carts and horses just to haul the money. The lifeblood of the economy was literally being clogged by its own currency's weight. In the 11th century in Chengdu, ingenious merchants invented the Jiaozi, the world's earliest form of paper currency. It was light and efficient. It was backed not just by paper, but by 100% copper reserves and robust private credit, allowing it to circulate among the Sichuan populace. In 1023 AD, the imperial court formally recognized and adopted it. The official Jiaozi ascended the historical stage, becoming the world's first state-issued fiat currency. This was a momentous financial innovation. The economic arteries were instantly unblocked, leading to unprecedented commercial prosperity. However, when the court observed this miracle invention, they saw not the value of credit, but a quick path to wealth extraction. To finance wars and cover fiscal deficits, the government began to print money without restraint. The currency's foundation of credit was utterly hollowed out. A catastrophic, state-sponsored hyperinflation swept across the empire. The Jiaozi transformed from a financial star into a graveyard for the nation's wealth. The Yuan dynasty continued this system to an even greater extreme. When credit was repeatedly exhausted, the Ming founder, Zhu Yuanzhang, still tried to rebuild monetary trust with the Great Ming Treasure Note. But this brief ideal was quickly shattered. The notes rapidly devalued into scrap paper. After this collapse of credit, the populace spontaneously reverted to using silver for valuation and commerce. This failed paper currency experiment left a deep wound. The empire could no longer trust the paper credit it had created itself. The empire required something more durable, more universal, and impossible to easily manipulate or overissue to anchor its value system. Thus, its gaze turned overseas to the hard currency. In the mid to late 16th century, a silver road across the Pacific was fully opened. Spanish colonists drove indigenous laborers to mine the Potosí silver mountains in Peru. Once minted, these silver coins were destined not for Europe, but for distant China. The Manila galleons sailed from Acapulco, Mexico, carrying tons of American silver across a 4-month voyage to Manila, where they met merchant ships from China. The Chinese junks were packed with luxuries coveted by the European nobility: silk, jade-like porcelain, and fine tea. All of it was exchanged for only one commodity: silver. This was an unprecedented global trade. China, with its exports, was aggressively absorbing the world's silver supply. It is estimated that between the 16th and 18th centuries, a full third, perhaps even half, of global silver production flowed into China. The Great Ming became a veritable silver black hole. This massive influx of silver completely energized the imperial economy. The reformer Zhang Zhuzheng implemented the single whip law, consolidating all taxes and duties into silver payments. Silver fundamentally became the lifeblood of the Ming Dynasty. This silver-driven economy displayed astonishing vitality. Private commerce boomed, cities thrived, and China was, for the first time, placed at the absolute core of a vast global trade system. All of this was predicated upon that relentless tide of silver. Yet the tide that brings prosperity can also recede. Any fluctuation upstream would create catastrophic waves on its land. In the 17th century, crises erupted. In Europe, the 30 Years' War ravaged the continent, disrupting trade. At the silver source, decades of mining exhausted the richest veins in Potosí, and production plummeted. A global silver contraction, like a distant heart attack, was transmitted precisely along the financial arteries to the heart of the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Empire's response was sluggish and fatal. All government revenue was tallied in silver, but the amount collected dwindled annually. The effect of silver expensive, copper cheap was severely amplified. The deepest pain was felt by the common populace. They earned copper coins but had to pay imperial taxes in silver. As silver's value skyrocketed due to scarcity, they had to sell far more basic necessities to acquire enough silver for taxes. In a good year, they barely survived. Coupled with natural disasters, it meant absolute annihilation. Simultaneously, the empire entered the Little Ice Age. Drought scorched the north. Deep cold afflicted the south. Crops failed and displacement surged. A depleted national treasury was powerless to provide disaster relief or maintain order. The Ming Dynasty had entered the classic death spiral. Emperor Chongzhen was not incompetent. He struggled diligently to save his realm, but he faced a body that had bled out and suffered organ failure. The more he struggled, the more he hammered the final nail into the empire's coffin. In 1644, Li Zicheng's army breached Beijing, and Emperor Chongzhen hanged himself, failing to control its own economic destiny. In the centuries that followed, the Qing dynasty failed to learn the lesson. The prosperity of the Kangxi Qianlong Golden Age was still built upon the continued inflow of American silver. But this time, history's repeated error would result in an even more brutal conclusion. In the early 19th century, a fatal new commodity, opium, emerged. The British East India Company cleverly used the opium trade to reverse the trade deficit with China. They no longer needed to pay silver for Chinese goods. Instead, they exchanged opium for everything from Chinese merchants. This was a brutal exchange. As opium poured in like a black tide, silver, the empire's lifeblood, flowed outward at an unprecedented rate. China reversed its 300-year status as a net silver importer and became a net silver exporter. The nightmare of silver expensive, copper cheap returned to haunt the Qing, but far more violently than the late Ming. Farmers' burdens multiplied, artisans went bankrupt, and the nation's wealth was steadily siphoned away through the opium pipe. Lin Zexu's destruction of opium at Human was a heroic moral stand, but it destroyed not just the drug, but a new, deeply unequal economic order. What followed were the warships and cannons, and a string of devastating treaties. The Treaty of Nanking, the Treaty of Peking, the Treaty of Shimonoseki. Behind every treaty lay astronomical indemnities. Every single payment was demanded in silver. The opium trade drained the populace's lifeblood. The war indemnities squeezed the empire's very bones. It took the Qing dynasty only a few decades to transition from the world's silver black hole to the great power's ATM machine. The entity that had run on silver for centuries was finally exhausted. The Qing collapsed. The newly established Republic of China inherited an even thornier legacy, a chaotic, fragmented monetary system. The market was flooded with Mexican eagle dollars, Spanish pillar dollars, late Qing dragon dollars, and poor quality coins minted by warlords. Unifying the currency was the government's most pressing task. In 1933, the nationalist government implemented the abolition of tael, adoption of yuan, reform to make the yuan the sole currency unit. This was the first crucial step toward modern finance. Disaster struck 2 years later. In 1935, facing a global silver price surge triggered by the U.S. Silver Purchase Act, China's silver was drained by arbitrage like a breaking dam, and the financial system instantly collapsed. Under this immense crisis, Minister of Finance A.H. Kung issued the famous decree, the implementation of the Fabi legal tender reform.
All silver had to be exchanged for the newly issued, unbacked paper currency, the Fabi. Initially, it stabilized finance and mobilized economic strength for the war. To fund the unprecedented scale of war, the nationalist government chose the most direct and fatal method, running the printing press. Embarked on a hyperinflationary spiral rarely witnessed in economic history. Denominations soared from 1 to 10 to 10,000 to 1 million to 100 million. Prices were skyrocketing hourly. The Fabi ultimately became worthless wallpaper. This grand experiment to move past silver ended in total failure. From the Song Dynasty's Jiaozi to the Republic's Fabi, we have witnessed a 1,000-year monetary cycle. It is a tragedy constantly repeated. Commodity and currency are two sides of the same coin. The commodity is the wealth, the flesh and blood of the economy. The currency is the measure, the certificate, the skeleton of credit.